On the 3rd of June 1955, one of the most horrific female killers in American history was led into the execution chamber. Her execution was one which was different and shocking, but she was regarded as a despicable murderess. Throughout the years there were many different criminals and women who were executed for a variety of crimes. Some of the most serious in the previous centuries were murder, arson and high treason, and today the death penalty still exists in some countries. But Bloody Babs, or Barbara Bonnie Wood Graham, inside of San Quentin Prison, would be executed for her involvement in the slaughter of an elderly widow. She was not the only one who would be linked to the killing, but she became the third person in the state of California to be executed by gas, which was considered not the most common execution method in America. But what is the story of Bloody Babs and her execution? Barbara Graham was born as Barbara Elaine Ford on the 26th of June 1923, and she did not have the best upbringing. Her mother earned a living through illicit methods. However, at the age of 23, Barbara's mother got married to a man named Joseph Wood, and she took his surname. Barbara, when she was just 2, experienced toughness as her mother was arrested and sent to a reform school, but Barbara was then left in foster care. She maintained she had been treated poorly inside of this and that she was beaten. But when her mother was released, she refused to allow her daughter to come and live with her. Barbara would then be raised by many different people, including members of her extended family, and it was clear that no one really wanted her. She was not the most well-educated, but she was switched on. But as a teenager, she was arrested for vagrancy, and she would then be held inside of a reformatory school for girls, and this was the very same place where her mother had been held. But then, when she was released in 1939, she tried to make a life for herself. She found love, and then married a man named Harry Keelhammer, who worked as a US Coast Guardsman, and she then studied and attended a business college. The pair had 2 children, however their marriage was not happy, as within 3 years they had divorced. Harry received custody of the 2 children, and then Barbara would be married twice more, and she would not live the best life. She began to work as a prostitute in the same manner that her mother did, and she did this during the Second World War, and she would take many clients inside of the naval bases. These women were known as seagulls who did this, and Barbara would then go to different bases in the Long Beach area, and would also visit San Diego for work. But she would be arrested for this. She had done this for many years, and she was known for her beauty and her striking red hair. And she also worked inside of a brothel, which was ran by a madam named Sally Stanford. But Barbara Graham then got involved in selling narcotics and in gambling, and she befriended a number of career criminals. Following a short imprisonment for perjury, as she gave a false alibi for her friends, she then moved to Reno, Nevada, and went to work inside of a hospital and a waitress. Many would have considered that she could have turned her life around, but then she went to work in Los Angeles, and she would go back to her other ways of working, which were more frowned upon. In 1952, she married a bartender named Henry Graham, and he worked inside one of the bars where Barbara was regularly seen. The couple had a son named Tommy, but Henry was a drug addict, and he was also a criminal. Barbara then met his friend Jack Santo and Emmett Perkins, and she began a love affair with Perkins. But Perkins, who was a thief, had told Barbara about a target, a 64-year-old widow named Mabel Monahan, who he believed had a lot of wealth and cash, along with valuable jewellery stashed inside of her home in Burbank. Mabel was a retired performer, and her ex-son-in-law was a multimillionaire who owned a number of gambling clubs. But Perkins told Graham that he thought there was around $100,000 in her home, which today would have been worth well over $1 million. However, on the 8th of March 1953, Barbara had dinner with Perkins, Santon, and a safecracker named Shorter. He claimed he did not want Graham involved on the raid on the home, but the next night the theft would take place. On the evening of the 9th of March, Barbara Graham gained access into the home of Mabel Monahan, as she claimed she had car problems and wanted to use the phone. But then the safecracker, along with Perkins and Santo, entered, and they then battered the elderly lady. Her mouth was gagged, and she bled, and the gang then tore apart her home looking for her valuables and a safe. But Barbara then gave a gun to Perkins to knock the elderly lady out. But she was panicking and could not breathe properly. But then Barbara Graham set upon her, and she violently beat the elderly lady. The men left, and they believed that Mabel had been killed, and 2 days later her gardener found her dead in the home. The group left with nothing, but there was actually money stashed inside of the home. However, the men were then arrested and accused of murder, and one of those arrested was the safecracker, Shorter. Shorter turned against the others as he turned state evidence, but he would later be murdered for this by Santo and Perkins. Barbara Graham was linked to the crime, and she was referred to in the press as Bloody Babs. She had no alibi and would later accept an offer of a false alibi, but this was a trick, and she was then brought to trial. Barbara was convicted of the murder, and with Santo and Perkins was sentenced to death. She did try to appeal, but this failed, and on the 2nd of June 1955 she was transferred to San Quentin State Prison. This was the day before her execution was scheduled to take place, but she was to die through a less common execution method, the gas chamber. On the day of her execution, her death was scheduled for 10 a.m, but she was given a short stay of execution of 45 minutes. But then her execution was pushed back for 11:30 a.m. Graham stated, "Why do they torture me? I was ready to go at 10 o'clock." But at 11:28, Barbara Graham was led from her prison cell, and she was taken to the execution chamber and the gas chamber. She requested a blindfold so she could not see who was looking, and her final words were, "Good people are always so sure they're right." She was told by the executioner that taking a deep breath of cyanide would quicken her execution ordeal, and she then cheekily replied with, "How the hell would you know, you silly rascal?" The executioner then documented her final moments and said, "We had her strapped in. She was given 2 stays. We had to open the door and unstrap her and take her back to her cell. She didn't go until 11:30. She was supposed to go at 10. I patted her on the leg and told her to take a good whiff. The executioner then lowered the level that caused the cyanide pellets to drop into a bowl of sulfuric acid which was under Barbara Graham's chair. Within 30 seconds, Barbara slipped out of consciousness, and then she rocked forwards 4 or 5 times before her head fell. She was quivering and shaking to her death. Bloody Babs was a woman who, despite having a rather tough life, would fall down a rather dark path which would lead her to ultimately murder. She was a woman who befriended many criminals in her life, but she would want to get rich from the theft of an elderly lady. But instead, she could not help herself to brutally beat a woman to death in her own home. She met her own death and demise inside of a gas chamber in one of America's most fearsome prisons. Thank you for watching and a support. Please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.